You're sitting down, looking in front of you with a project that you have to finish. But you're not focused on the project, you're on your phone, distractedly looking at things. It's not a big deal. You have a tight deadline, but you still have time. But you remain on your phone, and by the time you begin the actual project, you're out of time. And so you rush through it and don't do a good enough job. And the small problem has now become a big problem. And in those circumstances, everything that would have been okay has now shifted. Restless and rebellious. Now all these things happen to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. This lesson touches on an interesting idea on how we have this whole other perspective where, our lives aren't necessarily the things that we expect how we normally live. We are pushing our lives, dragging it along, and it touches on this restlessness that almost in a way we seem to have everywhere today. I have felt it myself. And looking at this, it has various stories in this lesson, but I want to use one story that's going to encapsulate all of that, which is actually Israel at Mount Sinai. The lesson touches on it briefly, but I want to really focus on that in its entirety, because it begins by talking about how animals have some interesting sense that they know earthquakes are coming, and scientists have researched that, where you start seeing hints of things that can cause restlessness and how animals have that, and how we kind of mirror that in other ways. But the big picture for me is specifically Israel begins in the desert, which is actually what it talks about, this restless in a wilderness. See, Israel had just come from this huge long trip. They didn't know where they were going, and here they are at Mount Sinai. They didn't know what to expect next. They had just seen God present his law and everything, and Moses had just gone up to the mount, and they stayed behind without a leader. What are they to do? See, they became restless, and I think that story is a good example of what this restlessness means, because in that situation, they wanted to do something, and they were feeling like they were out of time or didn't know what to do because they had no direction. And because of that, they started wanting to do things on their own. And in fact, Monday presents the title of It's Contagious. Now imagine this whole crowd of people starting to get restless and passing it along to everybody else. That is what was happening throughout all of Israel. People were now affecting each other, stirring this thought to what they should do next. And because of that, Tuesday's lesson touches on rebellion. They actually defied God. They had just seen God coming down and presenting his law and doing all these things for them. Could you even imagine? But they witnessed it. But somehow they forgot all that, and now they were rebelling because they needed some sort of leader. And I want to present a question to all of you, thinking about how is it that Israel led themselves to this point? Because when we read, it doesn't seem like it would apply to us, but somehow it really does. But it's still very hard to imagine because we're not in that situation. But just like the initial story of us getting distracted and putting our focus on something else, that's what Israel did. They put their focus on what was modern and what made sense to them at that time, to idols, to things that they valued, things that could bring them some sort of purpose. In the absence of God, that is what they did. Now, Wednesday touches on the intercessor part, because, see, as God was talking to Moses, Israel was down there doing all of that. We have to pause and look back, right? God was taking them through all of this as an opportunity for them to learn. You see, when we're trying to decide for our lives and our future what we have to do, how hard is it for us to actually know what we're doing? Because I really like how the Bible uses that term with the blind leading the blind, because we don't know where we're going. We have no idea how to actually make the right choice in this world. And how are we going to help someone else if we don't know? And so we have a lot of this where we try to help each other, whereas God comes in as that intercessor, the guide that kind of helps us navigate where we should go. And with that, that's where the faith comes in, which helps us understand what we should do. You see, with that rebellion and being restless, it's kind of because we don't have any idea where to go. And the lesson touches on that and expounds on it. Every single title, if you look, is trying to talk about each section. So with Monday, for example, the fact that it's contagious, and then the rebellion, there are these stages, right? How is it that a crowd after a sport, every time, whenever rivals are around, you see people start becoming more violent, when normally that would never happen, but they just kind of get moved in that situation. We somehow have this tendency to move to these mindless paths when we don't know what we should do. It's just somehow that absence of God, we want to find structure or some sort of meaning that we find amongst one another. And here we see Israel doing that. The lesson touches on some other stories. I think it's really important where you should read Wednesday's lesson and you should understand for what it's presenting for this intercessor. It talks about how God intervened when the 12 spies went into Canaan and brought back the news, and only 2 of them were faithful, how Joshua and Caleb were in favor of still going and trusting God, but everybody else from that fear started influencing everybody, and how God interceded, came in, and gave them a different message. Now, who would we be if we're in this situation where there are 12 people, 10 of them are against what to do? It's amazing for us to look at these stories and to imagine that we would be on that right side. But what are you doing now? How many people are actively trying to do what's right by seeking God? How often do we pause and stress over what we're doing and make the wrong decision and look back and regret it again and again? So I want to ask that question again. And I wanted to make this more fluid, this video, so it wouldn't follow every single step, because there's one big message here, which is because of how Israel acted, how are we going to act? Everything we read, the Bible is made, and these lessons are made for us to apply it to ourselves. So let's apply it to ourselves. How could we be in this situation? How is it that we could be these people that a whole nation chose wrong, even though they were seeing God, a pillar of clouds, fire that was guiding them? These miracles, they became so normal to them. What are the miracles? What are the things that are so normal to us that instead of us following God, we complain? So that's my appeal to you and my question to you. How are you living your life in accordance to what God has shown? Are you being restless and rebellious, or are you having faith in God and letting Him guide your life?